So let's talk about vaccines because there has been a lot of talk about vaccines and how the vaccine is going to be the mark of the beast. So if you get a vaccine, it's like putting 666 on your body. You are pledging allegiance to the Antichrist. And this has become quite a popular narrative expressed where else but the internet? The amazing world of the internet where anyone can become famous and any piece of BS, scam, information, garbage, misinformation, whatever you want to call it, can become popularly believed. That's the internet. So let's talk about vaccines, because there has been a lot of rhetoric and yammer about vaccines. Now, I understand that there are medical or physical complications that can come about from vaccines. I'm not saying vaccines are perfect, but if there was a vaccine that could prevent you from getting coronavirus, or more suitably for this discussion, if there was a vaccine that could prevent grandma from getting coronavirus, would you give it to your grandma? That's an important question. And if you say no, you're an asshole. All right, so the vaccine industry, there is a lot of money that goes into vaccine research, a lot of money that comes from the US government. How much money do we spend on the flu vaccine? How much money do we spend on research for the flu vaccine? I have here an article. It is from a website called Precision Vaccinations. And it talks about government funding for research for the flu vaccine. How much money, how much of our hard-earned tax dollars go into funding flu vaccine research? So it says here, and this is from December of 2019, so pretty recent. It says here that within the US, government's year-end spending legislation was a $200 million funding allocation to continue the research for creating a universal influenza vaccine. The legislation calls for a total investment of $1 billion. A lot of money, right? With $200 million allocated for each of fiscal years 2020 through 2024. So $1 billion for 4 years. It's not $1 billion a year. It's $1 billion for 4 years for flu vaccine research. Now, you would think if the vaccine was the mark of the beast, if the vaccine was such a huge conspiracy, you would think they'd be spending a lot more money on vaccine research. Now, let's talk about another vaccine for a different virus. This is an article that is from kff.org, and it talks about things going on in the medical industry and the like, national health issues. And it says here, federal funding for HIV has increased significantly over the course of the epidemic, rising from just a few 100,000 in fiscal year 1982 to more than $34.8 billion in fiscal year 2019. Let me repeat that. For the year 2019, the US government spent $200 million for influenza vaccination. The US government has allocated $1 billion USD for the years 2020 to 2024. For AIDS research for the year 2019 alone, the U.S. government has spent $34.8 billion. So we spend tens of billions of dollars for research for a vaccine for a disease that is extremely preventable. But for a virus like influenza, which kills tens of thousands of people in this country, and which at one point in time killed hundreds of thousands of people in the 1918 influenza epidemic, and which can mutate to the point where it can kill that many people again in our own times, we only spend $1 billion for 4 years. What does that tell us? For one, it tells us that this big old grand conspiracy that you evangelicals and you conservatives keep talking about the vaccine, it's the mark of the beast, is complete rubbish. Because if the governments of the world really were conspiring to make this evil vaccine, they would be spending a hell of a lot more money than $200 million a year. And they wouldn't be spending tens of billions of dollars for HIV, which only an extremely small percentage of the population has. And HIV isn't something that you get from a cough or sneeze. HIV comes in through blood transfusion. It's a sexually transmitted virus for the most part. It can come in through drug needles, but for the most part, HIV is something that comes from or comes through different behaviors that are not healthy. The flu, children get the flu. I've gotten the flu numerous times in my life. The flu is extremely contagious. But because we have a vaccine, it's been curtailed, although at times it can be quite disastrous. Nonetheless, it has been curtailed, and we have come a long ways from 1918. The problem is that eventually the influenza virus is going to mutate to the point where our vaccinations are going to be really futile. And we are going to go back to pre-vaccination times when this thing could kill hundreds of thousands, if not millions. Another thing that this tells us is that we're really not ready for another pandemic. We're not. We're just not ready. Before coronavirus, the worst pandemic that the world experienced was influenza, 1918. This thing killed tens of millions of people worldwide. It killed hundreds of thousands of people in the United States. And in the United States, there was a lockdown. Schools were closed. Churches were closed. It wasn't a big conspiracy. Restaurants were closed. Stores were closed. Sporting events were canceled. It was a national shutdown. And you have people today who are like, oh, I've never seen this before. Unprecedented. They're closing down the churches. Unprecedented. It's the Antichrist. No, your great-grandparents went through this. And it wasn't the Antichrist. It wasn't some conspiracy to shut down the churches. It was a necessary lockdown to curtail a disease or a virus. And in those days, there were people who were just itching to reopen everything, just like we have people today who are itching to reopen everything. That's why today, we have Donald Trump saying, yeah, we should open up all the schools. Anthony Fauci is wrong, doesn't know what he's talking about. Open up all the schools. Have all the kids get coronavirus so they can infect grandma. That's why I say, you conservatives are not pro-life. You're only pro-life when it comes to a specific political narrative, and that fits for pleasing a certain constituency that follows your movement. But other than that, you guys aren't really pro-life. I mean, you guys don't mind bombing a whole country and killing 1 million Iraqis. You guys don't mind if grandma gets infected. And then you'll use religion to justify it, and you'll say, well, yeah, grandma got coronavirus and died, but, God willed it. It was part of the will of God. It was the will of God. So all of a sudden, you guys convert to Islam and you start saying inshallah and become extremely fatalistic. Because what matters is not the truth. What matters is a narrative. And what matters is the emotional response that is gained from preaching that particular narrative so that you can maintain your following. And so in 1918, people were itching to reopen up everything, and they reopened up everything, and people went to boxing matches, people went to the football game, people went to the bowling alleys, people went to the churches, and guess what? You had a huge spike. And right now, we have people itching to reopen up everything, and some states are reopening, with certain regulations and restrictions, but nonetheless, some states are reopening, mainly the Republican states, and we have spikes. What do you know? Who would have guessed? And so what this really demonstrates is that we're not really ready. We're spending more money on HIV research, way more money, for a disease that you don't really have to get. It's 100% prevent. Well, not 100, because you could be born with it, but for the most part, it's preventable. But for a disease or a virus like the flu, which can potentially kill millions, just $200 million, that's all. We're not ready. And I talked about this in one of my last videos. When it comes to a national emergency like a virus and a contagion, we don't act as a community. We will try to destroy one another. We don't care. Grandma doesn't matter. The elderly don't matter. We come up with theories in order to undermine what the medical experts are saying. We say, oh no, the vaccine, that's the mark of the beast. Oh no, Billy Gates is the Antichrist. And we inculcate these ideas, and these ideas undermine things, and people start listening to them, and guess what happens? I'll tell you a story that happened recently. There was a guy who decided that the coronavirus was complete rubbish, and he decided to go on vacation. And I think he and his wife, they went to, I want to say Spain, if I remember correctly. And I want to say it was either the husband or the wife, I don't remember, but one of them got coronavirus and died. The New York Times interviewed the daughter, and she said that her father watched Fox News all day, watched Sean Hannity, listened to all the right-wing claptrap about how the coronavirus is a hoax and it's rubbish and it's not that big of a deal and it's overblown. That word has become so popular nowadays. And so that's what happens when people listen to undermining opinions, to detrimental and really insidious ideas. People die. It's not a joke. People die. And so what this tells us is that we're not united. We have now deaths in the 80,000s range. I think that last I checked, it was over 83,000 deaths in the US. We still don't care. Conservatives don't care. They're bringing up conspiracy theories. They're bringing up vaccine conspiracy theories. They're intermingling these ideas with Bible prophecy and how it's the mark of the beast. And then they're saying that the coronavirus is part of the one world order. How could the coronavirus be about the one world government that you conservatives have been fantasizing about for decades now, when the corona crisis is literally dividing countries? Today I wrote an article about the European Union and how Germany recently attacked the European Central Bank, because the European Central Bank has been buying the debt of deficit countries like Italy, poor European countries, countries that are in tremendous debt to the German banks. And so what the European Central Bank has been doing is buying the debt of these poorer countries, and in exchange, these poorer countries pay interest back to the European Central Bank. And so what that does is I'm not an economist, I don't know all of the technical details of it, but what this does is it keeps the Eurozone alive. It maintains the integrity of the Eurozone. And the German government attacked the European Central Bank for this. Why are you buying the debt of these poor countries? They should be just poor and enslaved and living in perpetual debt slavery. And you have to ask yourself, why is Germany attacking really the only institution that is keeping the European Union alive? Like, the only thing that's keeping the EU united is the Eurozone. You get rid of the Eurozone and we're back to World War atmosphere. We're back to a World War climate. And what's really driving these deficit countries into deeper economic depression is the Corona crisis. It's horrendous. And so to help these countries, the European Central Bank is buying their debt. But the Germans don't like that. Doesn't matter that these people suffered. Doesn't matter that Italy was the worst, was the most devastated by the coronavirus. It doesn't matter that Italy was the worst hit by the coronavirus. It doesn't matter that Italy had the highest death count. What matters is money, and they have to pay it all up. We can't be shouldering their debt. It's dividing Europe. There's no one world order. There's no one world government. How could you have a one world government when the world hates itself so much, when countries hate each other so much, but yet evangelicals are just one world government? What we have is a country that is not united. What we have is a country what we have is a world, really, that isn't united. And if you were looking for an example to demonstrate just how ununited America is, you found it. This corona crisis has really revealed how ununited, how polarized the United States is, because we can't even unite together to fight against the virus. Imagine we have over 83 or so thousand dead. That number is going to get higher. They're saying now that the experts are projecting that the death count in the United States is going to be in the 100,000 range. So it could be 100,000, could be 110, 120, 150,000 even. The question I have for conservatives is, would you be acting like this if ISIS killed over 83,000 Americans? Remember when ISIS was around and they were the biggest story in the world? And we heard all of these evangelical pastors talking about how they had a vision from God. And I was in Texas, and the Arabs were there, and they were killing all the cows. Remember all that BS? I'm not going to allow ISIS to kill my fellow Americans, but you're allowing a virus to slaughter your fellow Americans. Over 83,000 dead so far. And what you guys have to offer are conspiracy theories. Anyway, I think I've stressed this topic enough. I hope you guys have learned something from this message. I don't expect you guys to enjoy this message, but I hope you guys have learned something at least. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.